beauty of that child is the tragedy of the Trump presidency. He wants to be a cop. He knows what he wants to do. I hope he has a long life as a law enforcement officer. But I hope he never has to defend the United States Capitol against Donald Trump's supporters. And if he does, I hope he isn't one of the 6 who loses his life to suicide.
Cole Wallace disgustingly looped in a 13-year-old boy with brain cancer into an attack on the president over January 6th.
When does unwavering conviction curdle into cold indifference? At what precise moment does the passionate defence of a belief system morph into a disturbing disregard for basic human decency?
The behavior of Democrats last night was completely disgraceful and demonstrated how severely out of touch they are with the American public. It was the most shameful moment in the history of presidential addresses in that beautiful chamber. In what was supposed to be a unifying moment for our country, Democrat members of Congress instead screamed at the President of the United States, who was just overwhelmingly reelected by their constituents, walked out of the chamber, and worst of all, they disrespected the American people.
What if the self-proclaimed guardians of truth, those who shape our understanding of the world, were caught red-handed, sacrificing innocence at the very altar of their agenda? It's a chilling thought, one that most would dismiss as hyperbole.
Democrats didn't stand to keep men out of women's sports. They couldn't even clap for a girl who got her head smashed in by a man on a volleyball court. Democrats didn't stand for an innocent and beautiful child who is surviving brain cancer. They opposed eliminating taxes on tips and Social Security. They didn't stand in favor of cutting taxes for hardworking Americans. They couldn't even clap for 2 mothers whose daughters were killed by illegal aliens. One of the only things that could get Democrats off their feet last night was cheering for Ukraine, not for America.
Yet, a recent political spectacle didn't just raise eyebrows, it threatened to tear down the carefully constructed facades of power, exposing a wrought nerve in the body politics. We're about to dissect a moment so charged, so incredibly revealing, it sent seismic tremors through the established media landscape and left millions questioning who, if anyone, they could truly trust in an age of relentless information warfare.
They've allowed their Trump derangement syndrome to stop them from celebrating America and our people, and we will not allow them to forget that. And it's not just the Democrat Party. The mainstream media still doesn't get it. Last night, MSNBC's Nicole Wallace disgustingly looped in a 13-year-old boy with brain cancer into an attack on the president over January 6th. And CNN's first chyron out of the speech called it divisive.
The stage was set for what many anticipated would be another round of predictable political theatre. But what unfolded was far more incendiary. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt stepped into the spotlight, not with diplomatic platitudes, but with a verbal flamethrower aimed squarely at what she termed the deceptive charade of the mainstream media.
Beauty of that child is the tragedy of the Trump presidency. He wants to be a cop. He knows what he wants to do. I hope he has a long life as a law enforcement officer. But I hope he never has to defend the United States Capitol against Donald Trump's supporters. And if he does, I hope he isn't one of the 6 who loses his life to suicide.
Her opening salvo was a direct hit, a bold declaration against the blatant lies and utter disrespect she accused them of peddling. This wasn't just about defending a political figure. Leavitt framed it as a defence of a vast, often maligned segment of the American populace who felt their values and voices were being systematically erased.
And CNN's first chyron out of the speech called it divisive. President Trump wasn't divisive. The Democrats were. And CNN was proven wrong by their own viewers, 69% of whom, in a post-speech poll, said they had a positive reaction to the president's speech.
She painted a picture of a calculated campaign of misinformation, a deliberate effort to sow division, with its origins traced back to some of the most powerful and established media corporations. Leavitt didn't just make accusations. She promised to lay bare the evidence, to provide the receipts for a deep-seated hypocrisy that had, in her view, poisoned public discourse. But this was more than just a political skirmish. It was the ominous prelude to an exposure that would strike at the very heart of media ethics, revealing a story far more disturbing than simple bias.
It's sad and frankly pathetic that Democrats and liberals in the legacy media continue to allow their hatred for the president to override their love for our country. But nevertheless, the president will continue to unify this nation through policies that are grounded in common sense and that uplift all Americans.
The flashpoint occurred during a widely watched address by President Trump. Amidst the expected policy discussions and political rhetoric, there was a moment designed to unify, to touch upon a shared humanity. Trump introduced a 13-year-old boy, a courageous survivor of a grueling battle with brain cancer, whose dream was to one day serve as a law enforcement officer.
If Donald Trump could have scripted a reaction from Democrats to his speech, it would have been exactly what unfurled before our eyes last night. I was watching it live here in New York, and every time I thought they couldn't plunge any lower, they plunged a little bit lower. And if you can't bring yourself to get up onto your feet and applaud a 13-year-old boy who's had, I think, over a dozen brain cancer surgeries, who's come through, who's survived, and who has a dream, and that dream was to be a Secret Service agent, and the President of the United States, in front of the world, gives him that moment and makes him an honorary member of the Secret Service. If that doesn't move you, just as a human being, putting aside politics, to get up off your backside and applaud that brave little boy.
Wow.
It was a scene seemingly crafted for bipartisan applause, a testament to resilience and hope. Yet, the reaction from certain political quarters was, according to eyewitness accounts and Leavitt's blistering critique, anything but unifying. Instead of applause, there was an alleged stony silence from some, a refusal to acknowledge a simple, poignant moment of human connection.
You want to know why I have a bug up my ass about the left more than I used to? It's like this. There's an ugliness they never used to have. The liberals I grew up respecting, none of them are like this. Going after the wife, even the mafia doesn't do that.
Reports even surfaced of a dramatic walkout, an act of protest that, in this context, spoke volumes about the chasm of division. Karoline Leavitt seized on this, her words dripping with disdain as she highlighted what she saw as the peak of selective outrage. She described a political class that would passionately cheer for distant, abstract causes while turning a cold shoulder to tangible bravery and suffering right before their eyes. Their performative empathy, she suggested, vanished the instant it didn't serve their immediate political narrative. The silence from some was deafening, a chilling void where common decency should have resided. But what came next from a prominent media voice was a horrifying articulation of just how far some were willing to go, transforming a moment of potential unity into a spectacle of unimaginable cruelty.
These are the compassionate people. These are the ones who care more than anybody. But look at them last night. Look at the way they treated DJ Daniel. Look at the way they treated the family of that poor girl. Look at the way they behaved with their stupid signs, which meant no sense to anybody. It looked like a sixth form common room in a college. Look at everything they did, and the walkouts and all the rest of it. If you're Donald Trump, you are watching that back today and laughing your head off.
The bombshell detonated on MSNBC, delivered by one of its most recognisable faces, Nicole Wallace. In a move that left viewers aghast, Wallace took the story of this young boy, his harrowing health battle and his innocent aspirations, and twisted it into something dark and deeply unsettling.
What was that?
One of the most disgusting, shameful, reprehensible things I have ever seen on the news in America. And the bar was pretty high for that accolade. You know, I thought what Nicole Wallace did last night in taking that boy's story and in a weirdly dystopian, horrific way, asking us to think about whether he might himself. What on earth was she thinking?
Political theatre. She dragged the child directly into the vortex of one of the nation's most divisive traumas. Referencing the boy's dream to be a cop, Wallace reportedly drew a grotesque line connecting him to the tragic events of January 6th, speculating about a future where he might have to defend the Capitol from Trump's own supporters. Even more disturbingly, she allegedly invoked the spectre of officers taking their own lives, looping this young cancer survivor into a narrative of despair and political violence. The shockwave was immediate and visceral. This wasn't political commentary. It was widely perceived as a cruel, exploitative, and utterly unnecessary attack on a vulnerable child, all to score political points against a president she clearly disdained.
There was something wrong with those Democrats who didn't get up off their backside. There's something wrong with those MSNBC anchors. And it says an awful lot that they still pretend they are the caring ones, the compassionate.
Or was it a chilling symptom of something far more insidious? A rot that had taken hold within the media machine, where all human stories become mere fodder for the partisan grinder. The backlash was swift and brutal, and it wasn't just from the expected corners of conservative media. Even those who typically resided within the media's progressive orbit began to quietly, then loudly, question the narrative and the methods being employed. As the controversy surrounding Wallace's remarks began to boil, another major network, CNN, found itself entangled in its own web of contradictions. Immediately following Trump's speech, CNN's on-screen chyron, the text banner at the bottom of the screen, reportedly branded the address as divisive. It was a clear, swift editorial judgment, seemingly eager to frame the narrative in a negative light before audiences could fully digest the content themselves. But then came the unexpected, almost comical revelation. The network's own internal post-speech polling delivered a stunningly different verdict. A significant majority, a reported 69% of CNN's own viewers, indicated they had a positive reaction to the president's speech. The irony was almost too perfect to script. The very network that rushed to label the speech a source of division was now confronted with data showing its own audience found it largely agreeable, even hopeful. This wasn't just a minor discrepancy. It was an own goal of epic proportions, laying bare the yawning chasm between the network's preferred editorial stance and the actual sentiment of the people tuning in. What this starkly suggested was a profound, almost troubling disconnect between the media elites who craft these narratives in their metropolitan newsrooms and the everyday Americans consuming their content across the nation. It was as if they were speaking two different languages, inhabiting two different realities. This glaring contradiction was a visible crack in the dam of media authority, and soon other powerful voices, unburdened by network affiliations, began to amplify the growing, palpable unease. From across the Atlantic, a voice known for its unfiltered and often controversial takes weighed in with particular fury. Piers Morgan, watching the unfolding drama from afar, offered a perspective perhaps less entrenched in the immediate partisan warfare of Washington, D.C. His disgust was palpable, not just with the media commentary, but with the reported behaviour of Democratic lawmakers during the speech. He zeroed in on their alleged failure to applaud the young, brave cancer survivor, calling it an egregious failure of basic human decency that should and must transcend the bitter divides of politics. But Morgan reserved his most potent venom for Nicole Wallace. He didn't mince words, labelling her comments about the boy as one of the most disgusting, shameful, reprehensible things he had ever witnessed in the often turbulent world of American news. He openly questioned her very thought process, her fundamental humanity, wondering aloud what dark impulse could lead to such a weirdly dystopian, horrific statement. The core of Morgan's scathing argument was a timeless one, that an all-consuming hatred for a political opponent can utterly blind individuals, rendering them incapable of recognising, let alone honouring, moments of courage, innocence, and shared humanity when they stare them directly in the face. Morgan's unvarnished outrage resonated deeply with many who felt a similar sense of betrayal and bewilderment, including some observers who had long considered themselves part of the liberal consensus, now forced to confront an uncomfortable truth about the direction of modern discourse. Indeed, the disquiet wasn't confined to external critics. A significant voice, often seen as a stalwart of liberal commentary, Bill Maher, began to publicly expose an ugliness he perceived within his own ideological camp, lamenting a new, disturbing venom permeating the contemporary left. He pointed to tactics like relentless public shaming, cancellation campaigns, and even the targeting of political opponents' families. Lines he noted with bitter irony that even certain criminal enterprises wouldn't cross. This, he argued, stemmed from echo chambers alienating ordinary people and eroding public trust, suggesting these events were symptoms of a deeper decay. This confluence of reactions led some to re-evaluate President Trump's decision to feature the young boy. Was it merely kindness, or a calculated gambit by a strategist who understood his critics? The theory emerged that Trump, anticipating his opponent's animosity, set a moral test, expecting them to overreach and expose their own flaws. If so, it seemed to work, as their reactions were seen by many as validating claims of their irrational hatred and lack of empathy, turning the incident into a referendum on their moral compass. Ultimately, this maelstrom raises unsettling questions about dangerous precedents. When exploiting children and tragedy for political gain becomes normal, discourse erodes into character assassination. The public, exhausted and struggling to find truth amidst partisan filters, faces a dilemma. This series of events is a mirror to a fractured public square, forcing us to ask if the pursuit of political victory has cost our collective soul. When decency is crossed and institutions inflame rather than inform, the solution may lie in demanding more, questioning everything, and seeking reason beyond the noise. For the very health of our society is at stake.